Miss Lizzie. I don't ever smoke the dizzy, but we can always share some ditzies. It's just a cup in time. This song doesn't have to rhyme. Life's all of us, not every moment we can be feeling fine. I wanna share a moment, just a second if you will, maybe even a cup of thrill. We could share this performance. It's tea time, come sit with me.
Well, welcome guys, Miss Liz in the house, and today we have Michele, Torrey in the house. We're going to talk about Fox Creek. We're going to talk about her tea as well, and her tea is tenacious, forgiving, and kind. That is the tea we are serving in the house today. But before we get started, you guys know how Miss Liz rolls. Get over to all those platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Clapper, Lemonade, Blue Sky, all those good platforms out there, and give those a like, follow, and subscribe. And if you notice the guests are on those platforms, give them a follow as well, because that's how we do make a difference with supporting one another. Also, jump over to the podcast apps: Podbean, iHeartRadio, Listen Notes, Deezer, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those good platforms. And the ones I haven't mentioned, Miss Liz is on those as well. So check those out, give that like and subscribe, and get these tea times out there, because they do make a difference for the guests and for a listening audience that resonate with the stories. Also, jump over to babyboomers.org. Miss Liz has been partnered with them for about 3.5 years, almost 4. If you're looking to be on different podcasts, there's over 50 different podcast shows that are featured on babyboomers.org. You can pitch your story there as well. And I like always supporting my colleagues out there. If Miss Liz doesn't have the flavor you're enjoying or you're looking for, there's also some other tables over there that you can join. So let's get started with disclaimer and then a beautiful intro, and then we're going to get Michele in here. We're going to spill some tea and have some fun with you guys this afternoon. Disclaimer for Miss Liz's Tea Time live show. Miss Liz's Tea Time is a global platform dedicating to sharing real life stories, diverse perspectives, and meaningful conversations that inspire awareness, healing, and connection. I'm Miss Liz is going live using StreamYard. Before leaving a comment during the live broadcast, please grant StreamYard permission to display your name at StreamYard.com. Please be advised that all the content brought forward during any Tea Time show is presented in good faith. However, discussions may include opinions, beliefs, and perspectives that do not necessarily represent the views of Miss Liz or the Tea Time platform. Information shared by guests is based on their own experiences and is perceived to be accurate at the given time of airing. All guests, viewers, and participants are responsible for using their own good judgment when considering any action or decision that may relate to these discussions. Some episodes may cover sensitive topics, including but not limited to trauma, abuse, grief, mental health, and other emotionally triggering subjects. Listeners' and viewers' discretion is strongly advised. Tea Time with Miss Liz is an open discussion forum designed to offer insight, inspire awareness, and create connection. It is not a substitute for professional, medical, legal, or therapeutical advice. If you require professional support, please seek assistance from qualified professionals or trusted resources in your area. If you have any questions regarding this disclaimer or the content of the discussion, you are welcome to contact me, aka Miss Liz, directly at bookingmissliz@gmail.com or visit my link tree at Miss Liz's Tea Time. By choosing to participate in, comment on, or view these live shows, you acknowledge and accept this disclaimer. Your participation is entirely voluntary. I, Miss Liz, welcomes you to join the conversation with an open heart, and if at any time you feel this platform is not right for you, I respect your wishes and decision and welcome you back whenever you are ready. Tea Time with Miss Liz is serving truth and awareness one cup at a time. Well, welcome to Tea Time with Miss Liz, where every conversation is brewed with purpose, compassion, and the courage to explore the stories that shape who we are. Today, we are honored to welcome M.E. Michele Torrey, award-winning author, educator, humanitarian, and founder of Orphans Africa. Michele's historical novel, Fox Creek, was more than 30 years in the making. Through unforgettable characters and deeply researched storytelling, the novel confronts the devastating reality of slavery, prejudice, privilege, survival, and the lasting human cost of injustice. Her work reminds us that history is not simply a collection of dates and events. It is made of real people, silenced voices, painful choices, and the stories that must be remembered if we hope to build a more compassionate future. Michele's journey extends far beyond the written pages. Through her humanitarian work, teaching, and personal experiences of rebuilding after trauma, she has dedicated her life to creating understanding, encouraging empathy, and reminding others that storytelling carries both power and responsibility. Today we'll explore the 30-year journey behind Fox Creek, researching and writing difficult history, slavery, prejudice, privilege, and survival, the responsibility authors carry when telling historical stories, humanitarian work and the power of compassion, and why remembering the past matters to our future. Michele reminds us that the stories we dare to tell become part of the memory society carries forward. So grab your favorite cup and join us for a meaningful conversation filled with history, humanity, courage, and real life tea, truth, experience, and awareness. And let's welcome Michele to the table and let's spill some tea.
Hello, Liz. Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Michele. It is an honor to have you here. So, Michele, before we get started on Fox Creek, let's get to know you a little bit. So, who was Michele as a little girl, and who is Michele now?
Okay. As a little girl, I was really gregarious, unafraid of anything. I was adventuresome, half tomboy, half frilly princess. I just loved life and was always in the middle of everything, a little bit bossy, sometimes quiet, and so on. That all took a nosedive in my teen years when I moved out of a very familiar area into an area that I knew no one. And also, I would say, kind of the long arm of patriarchy started to chip away at my self confidence and who I thought I was. And I started a very long road of self doubt. And I will say also self hatred all through my 20s, my teens and my 20s, and became very quiet and very withdrawn. And it wasn't until my mid 20s that I started to champion myself and come out of that sense of being less than anybody else. And I started empowering my own self through education and through good works, through writing. And today I see myself as very much like that little girl who was so unafraid of anything.
So, Michele, how old were you when you started writing?
In fifth grade is really when I first remember calling myself a writer. My fifth grade teacher gave us a homework assignment, and I pulled out all the stops on how to write a good story, and she loved it, published it in the school newspaper. And from then on, I thought, oh, I'm a writer. So it really started there. And from then on, I nurtured that part of myself.
So, let's get into the Fox Creek because it took you over 30 years. So, what inspired you to write that story?
Well, the inspiration goes actually back to my childhood because I was growing up in the elementary school age around the latter 60s, mid to later 60s. And at that time, we were experiencing as a nation a lot of civil unrest, racial unrest, unrest over the Vietnam War, and so on. And so we would see these black and white images on TV of riots and protesters and so on. And some of it was very violent. And instead of turning off the TV, my parents allowed us to watch those images, but they didn't leave it there. Instead, around the dinner table, we would discuss what we'd seen, and my parents would talk about the various issues that were at stake in these civil rights movements. And so I began to understand at a young age kind of what justice was and what injustice was and what oppression was and so on. And so carry that into my adulthood. I've always been a champion of those who are marginalized, those who are oppressed, those who were born into circumstances that don't benefit them in the ways that perhaps I've benefited in my life. And so now, 30 years ago, I took a trip to New Orleans. This would have been mid 90s, took a trip to New Orleans with the intention of writing a ghost story in New Orleans. And so I'd done a bunch of research before I went. I get there and nothing was coming together as far as a plot goes for New Orleans. And, that's pretty weird because New Orleans is can be a very spooky city. It's got lots of history, as far as spooky stuff goes. And so you'd think something would come together. And instead, I felt drawn to the plantations up north. So I rented a car. I go up north to these plantations and I go in one after another. And I was expecting, I'm from the north, so I'm expecting a very balanced history. We're however many hundred plus years after the Civil War. I'm expecting a balanced history, that the tour guides are going to give us. And instead, I found it all about the white family, all very curated, whitewashed, if you will, and all about how wonderful life was back then. And with the background that I have in kind of the peace and justice, I was furious with what I saw, that nothing was said about slavery and about what the human cost was toward making those white lives so wonderful. And so I came home on fire, and I knew that that was the novel that I was meant to write. And so I began 3 years of research toward writing Fox Creek.
In those 3 years of research, Michele, was there something that really surprised you when you found out that you did not hear about?
Yes, I think I was expecting slave owners, the white slave owners, to be very much like what we see in a lot of fiction and a lot of movies, which is, kind of like the Simon Legrees. They're cruel. They are not likable. They're someone who you would, if you saw them today, you would never, ever choose to be their friend. But what I found was they're very much like people across the board. There were very benign slaveholders. There were very cruel and even psychopathic slaveholders. But then there was everybody in between. And I think that really surprised me. I was expecting, it to be weighted at the other end. But instead, I found myself reading journal after journal, or, letter after letter of these slaveholders. And I found myself drawn to many of them, of thinking to myself, well, if I met them in real life, I would really like them. They were fun-loving people. They told jokes. They were kind to their families. They did their civic duty. They might send over a workforce to their neighbor's property if their neighbor was down on their luck or sick. They were good people. So I thought that's key. That's key. It's key in understanding who these people really were. That slavery and owning people was so mainstream that even the ordinary people would do this.
Well, most sociopaths, right? They're like the next door neighbor. You
Yeah.
don't know until you hear the story, right?
Exactly.
There's so much that's hidden behind closed doors that people, when they hear it, they're like, but he was the nicest person, or she was the nicest woman. Like, wouldn't have expected this from them. We do have a question here from Antonio, and it's, was there a particular historical event that became the foundation of Fox Creek?
No. Now, Fox Creek is the first book in 3. It's a trilogy. And I have plotted the whole trilogy. I would say, it's going to take us, it starts in 1843, but it's going to end after the Civil War. So, the Civil War would be the big event that happens, which is really no surprise. But I would say outside of the Civil War, there's no one particular event that was the basis for my book.
We have another question for you, Michele, and it's, how did your extensive historical research shape the story?
Oh, gosh, I couldn't have done it without 3 years of research. I think especially as a Northern person, as a white woman, I could not have authentically written through the voice of not only white slaveholders, Southern slaveholders, but also Black slaves without this extensive research. And in my research, I made very, very certain within a few months of starting my general research to keep narrowing it down and narrowing it down so that I eventually started reading what's called primary sources. And a lot of listeners will be familiar with what a primary source is. It's something that was written at the time by a person who's living it. So it might be a letter, a diary, a journal, a log, a plantation log, for example. And so I read dozens and dozens of them by slaveholders. Now, it's different with the slaves, and it's an important thing to understand. Now, it was illegal at that time for slaves to be literate. So slaves, for the most part, were illiterate. So if you're going to try to find the life of a slave in a primary source, a slave who was born, lived, and died on a plantation, you're really not going to find that because it really doesn't exist. If it does exist, I have never run across it because they weren't allowed to, and it was punishable. It could be punishable by death. So what you do have are autobiographies or letters written by those slaves who escaped, and they might have escaped because they were literate, because they chafed against their masters. They might have learned how to read and write after they escaped. But what you have to realize is those slaves who had the courage to escape and leave everything that was familiar to them were a particular type of personality and a particular subset of the entire slave system. They were people who had courage beyond what normal people would have, who were willing to die in order to gain their freedom. And then the other subset of people who we have a history of were people from the 1930s. Now, in the 1930s, we still had slaves former slaves who were alive. And FDR sent out a whole bunch of writers into these Southern communities and had them interview ex-slaves. It was one of the ways of putting people to work back in the Depression. And so we have these oral accounts from people who lived back in slave days, as former slaves. But that's also a particular subset because they were children at the time that they were slaves, or they were very young adults. And also, all these years have passed, and their memories may not be what it was. And also, you have to understand that Reconstruction, that period right after the Civil War, was very difficult on ex-slaves. They didn't often have food to eat. They didn't have necessarily anywhere to go. And they were also, they suffered under organizations like the KKK and, that kind of oppression. And so they may have looked upon their time under slavery more fondly than their time under Reconstruction. And so it's a very prejudicial Reconstruction. So there's that big silent part of slavery, the slave experience that you as a writer have to reconstruct. And that's true also of scholars. They have to reconstruct that because they don't really know. And so, but after 3 years of kind of piecing it all together, you really learn and are able to see between the lines and put it together. So it was fascinating to do that, but also critical.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple questions that are coming in that I'd like to get to you, Michele. From Francis is, how did your background as an educator influence your writing?
Well, I have to say I'm not an educator as such. So I was never a teacher in the school system. I did teach microbiology for a little while at a community college. And I feel like I'm a natural born teacher. And so I've taught at, let's say, author conferences and things like that. So I wouldn't necessarily call myself an educator, but I would call myself a natural teacher. I think for me, being a natural teacher means understanding how to clarify something for people who do not know anything about something. So, how do you clarify? And you have to have this instinctual way of understanding where blind spots are going to be. And so I am able to do that throughout my fiction writing of understanding where are the blind spots going to be, how can I clarify, and so on.
Well, you're talking about blind spots, and we have a question that came in about blind spots. Why do you believe ordinary people can become blind to extraordinary cruelty?
Well, it's like the white slaveholders. And, I mentioned that I thought that many of them were very likable people. They were very ordinary people, um, people like ourselves, honestly. And they became blind to extraordinary cruelty because for a number of reasons. First of all, they'd been born into it. It was what they were raised knowing. And so when you're born into something, when it's something that you're raised knowing, you develop, I think, a blindness about it if it has to do with injustice in any way. So that injustice has become the norm. And you, as a child, accept that as the norm. You're an extraordinary child if you're able to question it. Okay. Even if you are a kind person at heart. I do think some slaveholders were able to question that, but were they able to buck the system enough to be able to say, well, I'm not going to do that as a slaveholder? And the reason why that would have been so difficult to do if you're immersed in that society is because being a plantation slaveholder was considered the pinnacle of Southern culture. So if you've got a pyramid and the top of the pyramid is slave holding, being a slaveholder, um, if you want to reach the top of the cultural pyramid, that's what you achieve. So to be able to turn your back on that and say, no, I'm not going to reach the pinnacle. I'm not going to be the top of my society. I choose, even though I've been born into it, I choose to turn my back on it. You would have been in some ways outcast in your own culture. You might have needed to move north, move to where nobody knows you. So it would have been an extraordinary feat of kind of um, human justice of being able to do that. There are examples of that, but that would have been very, very rare.
Why do you feel that there's always been this control of owning people? In the history of society, why do we always control one color, one race, one like? I never understood that. Why we do that?
Oh man, that's a good question. I'm not sure it's really answerable. Although I have multiple answers to that, I'm not sure there's any one answer that you can pin down and say, and this is why. I would certainly say greed is a big part of it, needing to climb to the top. Okay. I can't climb to the top unless I'm climbing over other people to get there.
Yeah.
I do give examples in my book, Fox Creek. The patriarchal slaveholder, one of my main characters, William, who's the patriarch of the family, he gives a reason to his sons, and he says, "I'll give you an example. You know, what would it have been like for Plato or Aristotle if they had been forced to perform their own menial tasks just to like live life? What if they'd have had to empty their own chamber pots or clean their own rooms or do any what he's saying is neither Greece nor Rome would have been able to rise to their glory if they had not had a group of people set aside, the slaves, to perform all those menial tasks on their behalf. And that way they could aspire to their greatness.
That's one thing that's really bugged me, Michelle, over centuries. Reading about history, there's always one race or one culture that is always trying to empower the other one. Men over women, the voice, taking a woman's voice away and then taking the man's voice away. Like, we're coming into that new generation of women are overpowering men now. Like, we're just reversing the roles instead of understanding the roles and just getting along as human beings.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you. There is no benefit to humanity for any one voice to drown out any other voice. I think we have to join hands, and we have to have a mutual bonding and respect for one another if we're going to grow and even survive as a human race.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the human race is really destroying each other, right? It's like,
Yes.
men will destroy men. Like, we have a question here from Bubbles, is what was the most challenging part of researching Fox Creek?
Oh, most of my research was done back in the 90s, and this was, I think, right on the cusp of the internet, coming into being. So for me, the most challenging part was I would know that there would be a resource out there, a primary source, but finding it was like pulling teeth. I'll give you an example. I knew that there was a catechism that had been written, I think in the 1840s, 1850s, and it was specifically aimed for white slave owners to instruct their slaves. So it was a catechism for slaves. I think the exact title was Catechism for Colored Persons. And I knew it was out there, and I wanted that. I needed that resource. And so finding it was incredibly difficult. I had to get multiple librarians on it. And finally, they got it to me in microfiche, which was greatly degraded. And some of the pages were hardly readable. But that was my biggest challenge, was tracking down these primary sources and being able to even read them and transcribe them. That was very difficult. Nowadays, I'd say if I were to search for that, even just that resource nowadays, it's probably easily online.
Michele, you just said microfiche. What is that?
Okay, microfiche, I'm dating myself. Microfiche would be like
I know, and this is why I love having guests. Teach me stuff, right? And my listeners are always like, Miss Liz is going to ask the question, what is it?
Yeah. So in the days before digital film, before everything was digitized, we had to like take our film to Costco or wherever to have it processed. It was always first in what we'd call a negative. Okay. And if you've ever seen that negative, it will be that film, that cartridge. And if you were to pull it out, it would be brown color, sepia color. That would be what a microfiche would be, except a microfiche would be a bigger, let's say a postcard size of this sepia color kind of filmy type material. I would receive this from a library, let's say back east. My library would receive it. They'd say, okay, it's ready. I would go into my library, and they have what's called like a microfiche reading machine. You load it up into their machine, and it's basically amplifies the picture on your screen in front of you and shines a light on it. And it may be every single postcard size one might have many, many different pages of scanned data on it. It might be newspapers, each page. It might have 30 pages on one microfiche. So you have to go back and forth between all the microfiches, and you can zoom in and zoom out on the machine. So ancient technology. I'm glad it's part of the dust. I'm glad we on the internet. Thank God.
Well, once it's on the internet, it's always on the internet, and this is, I love learning new things. And when my guests come on and they say words, my listeners are waiting for me to ask that question, because I want the younger generation to understand history as well, understand the technology that we used before the internet came along. You know, when you said negatives, I have a ton of negatives. My kids are always like, Mom, how do you look at that? And I was like, you put it up to the light and you can see the picture in it.
Yeah.
But thanks for letting us know what a microfiche is.
Yeah.
You know, this is what we need to do, is have these open conversations where we just ask questions and question things when we don't understand them, because this is how we learn.
Right.
We have a question here from the grown-up guide is, did writing this novel change your own perspective on history?
Oh, I think it did. Probably in a multitude of ways, but the biggest way that I can think of is it changed my perspective in how our kind of our tragic history and our history between both whites and blacks really shaped our country moving forward. Our country, for me, being the United States of America, it shaped us moving forward, and the vestiges of that exist today. And I'm a result of that. Every single person who has ever lived in the United States has benefited from that in some way, or been harmed by that in some way, but they've never been unaffected by that in some way. It is everywhere. It is pervasive. It's part of the reason why I was born a privileged white, and I use that word privileged. I definitely was privileged, but I didn't realize that until I had done all my research into Reconstruction, because Reconstruction is really when you learn how the Black race was so methodically oppressed.
You know, and a lot of people get offended when we say white privilege, right? But
Yes, absolutely.
really look back on the history and see how we were treated compared to others were treated. You know, sit back and read a history book once in a while. I'd love for the generation just to read history instead of a video game in today's world.
Right.
Um,
I can truthfully say there has never been a time in my life, except for once, and it has to do with Fox Creek, um, where I feel like I was discriminated against for my race. Okay. How many Black people can say that?
right.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, we have a question here from Olivia, and it's, which lesson from history do you hope readers never forget?
Oh, I think it goes back to your question regarding why do people oppress other people, other groups of people. I think that's the lesson I would hope we never forget in history, is the oppression of others never, ever benefits history. And in fact, it never benefits humanity. And in fact, humanity will always go backwards. It may not seem like it for the people who are on top climbing over the others, but it is true that as a species, as a race, we move backwards. And so if we're to move forward, if we're to help humanity to enter into a new phase of being in which we love one another, in which we respect one another and planet and other species, other plant, animal, we are going to have to do it with realizing that we cannot oppress anything else. And that will be on a personal plane all the way up to global.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring your book up if you just want to tell the
Yeah.
audio listeners what we're looking at and how the cover came about.
Okay, so the cover says Fox Creek, Book 1 of the Fox Creek Plantation Trilogy by M.E. Torrey. On the cover, it has a picture of a big tree. And in my mind, this tree is on the plantation itself, although it doesn't overtly show that. But the sun is setting through the trees, and it's a beautiful sunset evening, and you've got kind of an illustrated cotton bowl off to the side, done in an ink wash. At the very bottom, you see kind of water. And so water is flowing by, and that's Fox Creek. The cover came about just by me just brainstorming with a cover artist. I didn't have the funds to hire an artist who would draw or paint me a cover. So this is computer generated. I hope to have an artist do my cover in the future sometime when I have a little bit of funds set aside for that.
I think it's a really impactful picture because a tree stands for life.
Yeah, yeah.
And you wrote about people's lives. We have a question here about why is it important to continue telling difficult stories about slavery today, Michele?
Well, I think it goes back to what I said about how I believe slavery in the United States started it in terms of bringing masses of millions of Black people to the continent and then enslaving them. And then after the Civil War, having basically a plan on keeping an entire race subjugated. I think it's really important in moving forward that we understand our history, because unless we understand our history, we're not able to see through our history today and to see a lot of what's happening today within its context. I'll give you an example. The murder of George Floyd, and how Black Lives Matter came out of that murder. Black Lives Matter was the response, a very, may I say, calm response by the Black community saying, hey, wait a second, Black Lives Matter. You cannot simply just murder Black people. This has to change. In response to Black Lives Matter, there was a counter response that said, all lives matter. Now, on the surface, all lives matter sounds reasonable. Of course, all lives matter. All lives are critical, all right? So then, but that was the response to Black Lives Matter. It was no, all lives matter. But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that response? Here's what's wrong. It's white people saying to Black people, once again, we do not want to hear your side.
Yeah.
Be quiet. Okay. So when we say, all lives matter, that's us saying, no, sit down. We've got this. So that's how, when you know your past of slavery, you understand the past of Reconstruction, you understand how Black stories have historically been suppressed, then you understand why the statement, all lives matter, is wrong.
Yeah.
In that
Absolutely.
context.
Absolutely. It's like saying, be quiet again.
Right. Yeah. So if a child were to come to you and say, Daddy, does my life matter? And Daddy says, well, the lives of all my children matter. No, but does my life matter? Well, the lives of all my children matter. What are you really saying to that child? You're saying, go on.
Yeah.
All my kids matter.
You all matter. Like, get out of here. I really appreciate this open conversation with you today, Michele, because, when people came out with that all lives matter, I was just like, oh, here we go again, right? It's trying to silence one race again. Like, can we just stop trying to silence people? It's just like with COVID, right? COVID was the race of the injection, not the injection. It was silencing people who didn't agree, right? The conspiracy and all that, right? It's a repeat. If we don't understand the history, we're going to repeat it, and we're going to even do worse than what we did the first time.
Exactly. Amen. Yep.
We have a question here. How do you balance historical accuracy with emotional storytelling?
Oh, that's a good one. I love historical accuracy, but and it shows in my book. The 3 years of research shows, but I tell writers at writer conferences, research is like this. It's like a mountain. And so you've done your mountain of research, and this is how much you know. It's the whole mountain. But do you put the whole mountain in your book? Hell no. You put all your readers to sleep. You have the ice cap, okay? The ice cap is in your book. And that's the stuff that just makes it feel real. It makes it feel like, oh, we're there, okay? And it feels real. So I have my historical accuracy, but I also realize that this is storytelling, okay? So at some point, you have to say, how much historical accuracy do I want versus how much storytelling do I want? And you have to balance that so that it's a story that's impactful. It's a story that means something. So I may fudge here and there, with the emotional side of things to help the higher truth come through. Let's put it that way.
Michele, was there a time when you were writing the book where you were just like, this is so heavy, I don't know if I can finish this?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I have I think a God-given ability to write about heavy things without becoming destroyed by them. And I'm just thankful for that. So when I have to write, let's say, a heavy scene, I'm able to do the prep work for that scene, have, let's say, the juicy tidbits from research kind of laid out in front of me so that as I write the scene, it's all there. I don't have to stop and go looking for it. It's all there. And then I start my scene and I'm able to really just be there in my scene. And the trauma that may be in my scene, I'm able to feel that trauma, but I channel it. Okay. I channel it. So very little of it just like settles into my pores and, pushes me down. I'm able to channel it, but I'm also able to temper it to know just how much to give to where I don't cripple the reader. Because I don't want my reader to be so weighted with my story that they can't keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when you're writing heavy stuff, right? I know my editors, when I wrote my story, they were like, you don't need to put all of that in. The reader will understand.
Right. The reader fills in the blank spaces. So a lot of what happens in my book happens off screen. So we're not there. We don't see it. We hear about it. Okay. Hearing about it's different than seeing it. Hearing about a whipping's different than being there for a whipping. So I use that technique a lot so that readers realize, oh, wow, okay, there is a lot of cruelty happening here. Even while I like this slaveholding family, they're not all, butterflies and, bonnets. It's, so I use different techniques to help lighten the story, if you will. And then I also intersperse the story with a lot of levity. So a lot of chapters about different subjects that are woven in throughout, through, let's say, the viewpoint of the plantation owner's daughter, who's a teenager. She's concerned about clothes and boys and all that kind of stuff. So we have those moments of levity, and it helps balance out the heavier subjects.
So, Michele, you said this is a trilogy, right? So there's 3 books.
Yes.
So are all 3 books out, or is this just the first one?
No. I really wanted to release the first book to find out how it would be received both by critics and by readers, because I'm white and I'm writing through main characters who are Black. And I wanted to know if that would be accepted. And it has been for the most part. I am deeply into writing book 2. And like I said, all of them are plotted.
Well, we have a question here about Orphan Africa.
Yeah.
Has your work with Orphan Africa influenced the way you tell stories?
I'm not sure that it has, other than it's made me hyper aware of marginalized communities. My work in Orphans Africa, we work in Tanzania specifically, and in multiple locations that are off the grid. I mean, so far off the grid, it's not even funny, to where, it may as well be 200 years ago when we first started working there. Now these places have electricity and running water, but when we first started working there, 2007, it may as well be 200 years ago. And so to see those lives being acted out where the world is completely unaware that those lives are there, and that those lives they're born there, they live there, they die there in that same village. I already knew that was happening, and by this time my book was already written. But it still just was confirming to me that this really does happen. People can be born and live their whole lives without any ripple effect outside of that community where they lived, because they're unknown, and they're so poor, and they have no technologies, and nothing gets beyond that village. And they also have no transportation, and all it is footpaths. So literally people have been no farther away from their village than where they can walk in half a day, because then you have to return.
So tell us a little bit about Orphan Africa. How did it start, and what is it?
So I co-founded Orphans Africa in 2007, along with my husband and a good friend, Lisa de Guzman. And we started in Tanzania with also the intention of climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. That's kind of how it all came about. But we volunteered at the home of a fellow who was the founder of an NGO there in Tanzania. So it was a group of Tanzanians. And my purpose in going to stay with him was I knew they needed help, and they had reached out on the internet asking for help. My purpose in going there was to find out who they were they trustworthy, what was their purpose, their mission, what kind of work did they do? And what I learned going there was that they were, first of all, exceedingly poor. They hardly had enough, for dinner, and for charcoal to cook the dinner on. But at the same time, he and the people who belonged to his NGO were committed to building schools for orphans in Tanzania. So we went to go visit one of those schools, and it was just cinder block with sand floors. One of them had no roof. There was one set of textbooks for 120 students, one toilet, one bucket of water. So they were trying to make this happen with nothing. We watched them for a couple of weeks, and we came home and we decided, the three of us, that we could help them. So we founded Orphans Africa. It's a 501c3 here in the United States, so a nonprofit organization. And we've been going now almost 20 years, and we still work with that NGO. So what we do is we're the fundraising arm. We send them funds. They build schools. And so to date, we have 6 schools on 5 campuses. We have 3 nursery schools, a primary school, a high school, and a vocational technical college. We've educated thousands of children. Some of the children have gone on to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, secretaries, business owners. Some of them have come back to teach at our own high schools and so on. And they get some of the best educations that's available in Tanzania. And we're really, really proud of what we've done.
Well, I really want to thank you, Michele, for helping. It's when you see something with your own eyes, you can make that difference by just saying, you know what, I can find a way to make this work.
Yes. Yeah. And we're just ordinary people. None of us are made of money.
Well, that's usually where the change comes from, right? Is the,
Yeah, exactly.
The everyday person that just says, you know what, I don't like what I'm seeing. I want to make a change.
Exactly.
We sometimes look at the big names, right? The celebrities and the influencers and all that, but there are people too. You know, they have their stories too. And sometimes they get blinded. They get that blind glass on, and then they forget about humanity.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes they need that wake up call too. A lot of celebrities will lose their jobs, lose their life, and then they'll say, "Oh, this is what real life is."
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I think we all need that wake up call from time to time, where we just say, you know, this is not right. Let's make a change.
Yeah.
Um, and
Absolutely.
and that's all I want to do with Tea Time is I just want to make a change by educating people that there are incredible people out there like yourself, Michelle, who are making a difference because you've seen something you didn't agree with.
Right. Right.
You know,
In Tanzania, it's they've an entire generation of people has been wiped out by AIDS and tuberculosis, cholera, malaria, and I mean just about every disease on the planet is present there because their healthcare system is so well, they just don't have enough to go around.
yeah.
And so like in this particular village, when we first arrived there, there was one stream for their drinking source and they never filtered their water. So they had, diarrhea all the time and they were suffering with intestinal parasites and, you name it. And oh, it was just awful. And to be able to provide clean water for them, we have deep water wells and to be able to provide health insurance for all of our children and all of our teachers and administrators. It's been literally life changing. And so in Tanzania, because that whole generation is basically their parents have been wiped out, they're 1 out of every 11 people in Tanzania is an orphan. And the median age in Tanzania is 18 because of all this death. So you can imagine with such a surplus of orphans and such a young population, there's too many orphans. The people who are already so poor, just can't take in any more orphans. I know grandparents who were in their 90s still going out to hoe their fields because if they didn't have food. And they're looking after 10 grandchildren who have no parents. All 10 of the grandparents' children have passed away from AIDS and all that. And so they have, I don't know how many grandchildren they actually had, but every time I went to go visit them in their little hut, they had a new crop of grandkids they were looking after and trying to get through school. Oh, it's just unbelievable.
So, Michelle, by writing this book, Fox Creek, what message do you want to leave to the world?
Oh gosh, I think I just want to leave the message of together, reader, writer, all the people who've experienced oppression or who've been oppressors, we can do this. We can do this. We can make this world a better place. We can move forward together. All it takes is the decision to do that. And we need to open ourselves also to healing, to being healed and to providing healing. I often see on the internet so much mockery from the left, from the right, from all sorts of folks. And I really think mockery needs to end. Okay. And we need to stop taking part in it. It's often quite fun to participate in mockery, but we need to stop and we need to be devoted to being healers in our world and for our planet.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It's easy to jump on the board, right? It's like bullying. You know, you jump in the bully train and then you don't even realize what you're doing anymore.
Right.
You lose yourself in it.
Yeah.
You know, the internet is good for some things like this conversation, but it's also not good for other things. And
Right.
we really got to start getting back to the education, start understanding life, start understanding human beings and stories, you know, because I believe that storytelling is the new change in the world. Getting stories out there, bringing back the history, understanding the history so we don't repeat the history or make it worse than what the history was, you know. and stop ignoring the history. We got to really keep the conversations going. Michele, what would your final message be for the listeners today out there?
Well, I guess my final message is I believe in humanity. I believe in the listeners. Just the fact that you're tuned in here means that there's a spark in you, no matter how small, that is ready to open. It's ready to be ignited. And I would say, listen to that. Be cognizant of that, because it's there. It's ready. You're ready. We can do this together. And I do believe in you.
So, Michele, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, where could they reach you? If you could just spell out the website for the audio listeners.
Yeah, so reach me at my author website, which is www.metorrey, and that's TORREY.com.
And before we wrap up, I just want to get your tea out there, because people know that Miss Liz always asks us about the tea. The tea that you gave me, Michele, was tenacious, forgiving, and kind. Why'd you give me those 3 words?
It takes tenacity to be where I am today with, the book that took me 30 years to write, as well as Orphans Africa, and doing what we do half a world away. What was the next word?
Forgiving and kind.
Forgiving. I try to be an example of forgiveness in my life. So it's very, very easy to hold on to grievances. What's difficult is to let the grievances go. And so, yes, I still get grievances, but the difference is I don't hang on to them. Okay. And so I work through them and I let them go, and I pray about it and I let them go and let them go. And what was the last one?
Kind.
Kind. Okay. So kindness, I think, is where our world is going to be at. Give it a little time. Kindness is going to keep paying it forward, and do your bit.
I really enjoyed this conversation, because I learned a lot from you, Michele. I've learned a lot about the history. And just because we're in Canada and the United States and another country, we can make a difference when we join together and have the open heart conversations. Slavery didn't just happen in the United States, it's happening globally. So let's remember that. Michele is sharing the story of Fox Creek. It happened in the United States, but there is slavery around the globe. So do your research and have that conversation with your children and your grandchildren. It doesn't have to be a heavy topic, but just make them understand that everyone has a right to a life, and let's get the history of slavery out there and keep the conversation going, because there's a lot to learn from them. A lot of resilience, a lot of strength in those stories. So thank you for that, Michele. Thank you
so much for having me here.
And thank you to the listeners and the tuners that came in and brought your questions. I always appreciate you guys. I always try to do my best to bring in guests that we can open up conversations like this, open heart and safe spaces. We're just going to do a recap of what today's tea time was, and then we'll be back with a returning guest of Doug Lawrence, who was on my radio show and on my tea time multiple times, and he'll be back and we'll be talking about the silent pandemic. What a powerful and deeply meaningful conversation we've shared today. Michele, thank you for bringing your wisdom, compassion, research, and humanity to the tea time table. Today's conversation reminded us that history cannot be understood through facts alone. We must also be willing to listen to the human stories beneath those facts, especially the voices that were ignored, erased, or never given the opportunity to speak. Through Fox Creek, you challenge readers to confront the realities of slavery, prejudice, privilege, injustice, and survival, while never losing sight of the people whose lives were forever changed by them. We explored the responsibility of historical storytelling, the importance of remembrance, and the courage required to write honestly about some of humanity's darkest chapters. One of the greatest takeaways is this: when we refuse to remember history honestly, we risk repeating the pain it created. Your work reminds us that storytelling is not only about preserving the past, it is also about shaping the choices we make in the present and the future we leave behind. As we close today's tea time, I'd like to leave everyone with this thought: what stories have we inherited, and what responsibilities do we carry to make sure the truth within them is never forgotten? Remembering may be painful, but the silence has a cost too. Michele, thank you for using your voice to educate, challenge, and awaken compassion. Thank you for reminding us that every life matters and every story carries meaning, and humanity grows stronger when we choose courage over comfort. Until next time, continue seeking truth, continue protecting the stories that matter, and continue serving real life tea. Truth, experience, and awareness, one conversation at a time. And today's takeaway from myself is the past cannot be changed, but the way we remember it can change the future. When history is told with honesty, courage, and humanity, forgotten voices are restored and new generations are given the wisdom to choose a better path. And I'll see everybody at 7 p.m. and we'll do this all over again. Thank you, Michele.
Thank you so much.